The 7 impossible structures that prove history is a lie. The surveyor's thread snaps in the wind. The line on the tablet says true north, the compass says he's wrong. But the limestone doesn't care. Its edges kiss so tight a razor won't slide between. He runs a finger along a joint smooth as if poured, then looks up at 4 sloping planes that meet with no visible error. This should not exist here now with these tools. If one stone breaks the clock, the whole timeline slips. 7 structures do more than slip it, they crack it. One impossible detail ties them together. We're not ready for it yet, but we will be. The promise and roadmap. Here's the deal, we're not hunting monsters, we're measuring them. 3 pillars hold this story up: impossible precision, impossible logistics, impossible chronology. If anyone holds, the standard narrative starts to wobble. If all 3 show up across continents and centuries, the wobble becomes a rewrite. We're setting strict rules. No vibes, measurable anomalies, or we pass. Primary research where we can cite it. Claims you can try to break yourself. If a result can't survive a tape measure, a compass, a spectrometer, or a calendar, it doesn't belong here. We'll stop 7 times along this road. First, the Great Pyramid's machine-level tolerances, base leveling, true north alignment, and granite work that behaves like it saw a milling plan. Then we jump to Puma Punku in Bolivia, interlocking andesite H-blocks, interior channels, repeated features that look like templates, not guesswork. Third, Baalbek, where the stones stop being big and start being you can't lift that, with the Trilithon and its 1,000-ton cousins daring anyone to reenact the logistics. Fourth, the Nazca Lines, the sky problem. Straight lines over uneven terrain, huge figures visible only from altitude, executed with calm surveying discipline. Fifth, the Antikythera Mechanism, the analog sky computer that predicts eclipses and encodes lunar anomalies, which implies a lineage of prototypes and a school that left almost no trace. Sixth, Göbekli Tepe, monumental architecture thousands of years before the city, then deliberately buried as if to freeze a memory. Seventh, the Baghdad Battery. Controversial, yes, but testable as an electrochemical cell that, if real, forces a rethink of workshops and finishes. We're planting 3 open loops, a shared measurement echo that shows up where it shouldn't, a sky code baked into stone beyond coincidence, and a material signature, habits that look like a craftsman's fingerprint crossing borders. The stakes aren't abstract. This is how we tell our kids who we are. If the timeline is wrong, the story is wrong. Fair warning, we're conversational, skeptical, relentless. To see the crack, we start where the story is supposed to be strongest. The Great Pyramid's machine-level precision. Stand at the southeast corner at dawn. The shadow rides the casing bed like a blade on glass. The first stake is simple. If Old Kingdom teams did this with copper, stone, and time, then we've underestimated everything downstream. Surveying in Mesopotamia, masonry in the Andes, astronomical planning in Greece. Because here, precision isn't decorative, it's structural. Action first. Forget the missing smooth white casing. A few stones at the base still tell the truth. Joints so tight a blade barely whispers across them. On the ground, the foundation is leveled to within millimeters over a 13-acre footprint. The sides don't just aim north, they cling to it. The orientation error is tiny, minutes of arc, not degrees. That demands a method, not luck. Walk the perimeter and the geometry stays stubborn. The side lengths match within inches across hundreds of feet. Corners, true right angles, don't drift more than a human hair per meter. Inside, the king's chamber sits in granite that laughs at copper saws. The sarcophagus box. Its interior corners are square in a way a field-worn chisel doesn't normally deliver. The chamber roof uses stacked relieving blocks, massive granite beams layered to redirect stress around an empty room, which means someone modeled loads in their head. Human angle. This isn't a wizard in a robe, it's foreman counting stones and bad days. Picture the survey team sleeping on the site, correcting lines at first light because heat shimmer ruins them by noon. Imagine the quarry boss deciding whether to gamble on a bed that might fracture halfway through a cut. There's a scribe keeping tally of transport crews, water, and wood. Behind every joint that seals tight, there's a worker who shaved that last fraction because the master would reject a whisper of daylight. Now the complication. Precision outside is one thing, inside it turns weird. Air shafts, narrow, straight, and angled, strike towards specific regions of the sky. The corridors hold dimensions that seem to carry ratios, not random lengths. If you move through the grand gallery, the corbelling stacks with consistent offsets as if pulled from a template book. These are machining behaviors, repetition, standard offsets, predictable fits. Let's give the counter-arguments their due. Skilled labor plus time. Absolutely. You can turn soft limestone into a mirror with sand, water, and enough hands. You can true lines with solar observations and clever sighting tricks. Over decades, error can average out. But the tolerances here are repeatedly smaller than the error budgets we'd expect from ad hoc methods. It's not that perfection appears everywhere. It doesn't. It's that the system shows selective excellence where it matters most. Orientation, base leveling, critical joints, high-stress spans. Meanwhile, something else is happening in the stone itself. Granite for the king's chamber comes from Aswan, far to the south. Transport isn't just a feat, it's planning. Those beams had to arrive in sequence. If one cracked, the schedule collapsed. The relieving chamber stack is a commitment. You don't layer unneeded mass unless you're countering a known risk. That's engineering judgment in advance, not patchwork after failure. Here's where it gets thorny. Tool marks and residues tell a mixed story. You can see copper saw striations paired with abrasives like sand. You can replicate straight cuts with grit-charged cords, but replicate the interior of that granite box to the same squareness and finish. Modern attempts get close, then drift. The fit you feel running a fingertip along the seam doesn't lie. Personal test, even a tiny ridge catches skin. At Giza, many don't. The alignment to true north needs a way to find north that beats a wandering needle. North is a trick of the sky. Shadow methods work, star transits get you closer. The likely approach, observing circumpolar stars crossing a plumb line, correcting with repeated trials to shrink error. That demands time windows, clean horizons, and patient nights. It also demands that someone set a tolerable error. That's the part that reads like a speck. This wasn't close enough. This was within a limit. Consider base leveling. 13 acres, you don't eyeball that. Water trenches, sighting frames, repeated fills and drains, then cut, check, repeat. The last check happens when the first course ties. If a corner lifts, you see it immediately in stone behavior. The masons didn't see it, not because it wasn't there, because they'd already killed it. Now the big why it matters. If this level of planning and execution sits at the core of the Old Kingdom's signature monument, then their knowledge networks were more than local tricks. Surveyors were trained to a standard. Quarry teams followed marks that meant the same thing from Aswan to Giza. Scribal math tracked volumes and angles with rules you could hand down. That implies schools, pattern knowledge, maybe even reference tools we haven't found because they were perishable. Wooden squares, string templates, papyrus guides. There's one more headache. The pyramid's precision clusters. Not every block is a marvel, many are rough. That's how modern projects look. 2 critical areas get the tight tolerances, non-critical areas take the slack. That's a mindset. Assign your best people and your time where failure would cascade. It's logistics intelligence, not a miracle. The easy answer says, thousands of workers, decades of effort done, true and incomplete. The harder answer asks, where are the training artifacts? Where are the standard sticks, the gauges, the pattern blocks? If they were wood and fiber, the desert erased them. But their ghost remains in the stone. If precision is a one-off miracle, fine, write it off as a cultural summit you only hit once. But Giza isn't an isolated mountain. It's a signal. And if you're hoping it stands alone, Bolivia ruins that hope. Puma Punku's interlocking stones. While the desert light at Giza sharpens edges, the Altiplano wind does the opposite. It rounds them, scours them, tries to erase intention. And yet at Puma Punku, intention refuses to fade. This is the place where the word primitive stops doing any useful work. If tight joints at Giza were a standard, here the standard becomes a geometry lesson. Walk the scatter field. It looks like a stone factory had its shelves kicked over. H-blocks lie on their backs like letters that fell out of a page. Each face isn't just flat, it's disciplined. Right angles repeat inside right angles, edges break into steps, and along the sides you find consistent slots, mortises, and shallow drill-like recesses spaced as if by a jig. When 2 blocks meet, they don't just touch, they interlock. No mortar, just confidence. Stakes up front. If a mason trained with ad hoc habits made these, then trial and error produced repeatable modular parts across dozens of pieces, parts that still line up after earthquakes, looters, and centuries of frost. That means templates. And templates mean a shop culture, not one weekend of inspiration. Action, the andesite is the problem child, harder than the red sandstone foundations, stubborn on a tool edge. Copper alone loses the fight, so the team that shaped it used abrasives. You can cut straight lines with a grit-charged cord. You can flatten with grinding sand and patience. You can snap edges crisp if you control your pressure and your checkpoints. The signature here is repetition. Channels that run inside H-block webs match across separate pieces. Corner notches mirror depth and width. The H itself isn't random flare. It's a structural solution to lock members while controlling load paths, the way a modern connector spreads force. Human angle, picture the template maker, the most valuable person you'll never hear named. They guard a handful of boards or strings, reference lengths and angle jigs used to lay out each block. Apprentices drag cords through slurry all day, checking the sound a surface makes when a straight edge kisses it. The foreman calls a reject if a notch misses by a finger's width. That's cost. That's pride. And someone is managing the sequence because interlocks only work when placement order is correct. Materials question. Andesite doesn't reward the sloppy. Try pushing a soft metal chisel into it without grit and you bruise, you chip, you wander. Add sand and you can abrade grooves clean. Where rivet-like cramps tie stones, analysis at nearby Tiwanaku shows ternary bronze clamps, copper with arsenic and nickel, poured into dovetail slots to stitch courses. The clamps are gone at Puma Punku, but the slot shapes argue the habit traveled. Metalwork and stonework speak to each other here. Theories versus tests. Replicas have been tried. With simple tools, you can make a block with an H, silhouette, and crisp edges. You can carve interior channels. What breaks modern attempts is standardization across dozens of parts, the way widths, depths, and step heights align without drift. Where the copies fail is consistency of offset and the sharpness of interior corners under load. The real stones maintain 90-degree corners inside complex recesses with minimal spall. That takes staged grinding and polishing, with checkpoints you don't invent on the fly. Impact, standardized interlocks change everything. They imply measured repeats, not close enough. They let you predict how a wall behaves in wind and tremor. They let a site scale labor, hand one team the template set, and they can make members that fit a plan they've never seen in full. That's modular thinking. That's industrial behavior before factories. Meanwhile, something else is happening on the ground. The sandstone foundations carry channels and cutouts that route water. The andesite blocks perch on those beds like precision parts on a base plate. It suggests a drainage logic, a load logic, and perhaps a ritual logic stacked together. Purpose arguments multiply: gateway, shrine, calendar. But beneath the debate sits the same quiet fact: whoever ran this site had a spec. Let's handle the pushback. People say straight lines don't prove machines. Correct people with time and grit can make straight lines. They say photos exaggerate tolerances. Fair angles compress edges, but stand next to an H-block and run your hand along a slot. You feel the absence of waviness. The reveals sit at uniform depths. The drill-like pits, some align, some don't, tell you there were different teams, different days, but a shared intention. The variance lives in the finish, not the layout. Comparisons help. At Inca walls, polygonal blocks key in with remarkable fit, but their surfaces undulate by design. At Puma Punku, the style is the opposite. Planar faces, rectilinear cuts, interior mortises that feel pre-specified. It's less sculptural, more mechanical. Impact immediate and wide. If this is the Tiwanaku world in the 6th century, they're not guessing. They're training. They're moving in step with surveyors who can keep a baseline straight over real ground. They're teaching apprentices to hit tolerances, not just shapes. And that spills outward. Quarry selection, transport slings that don't chip edges, staging areas that protect heiresses from damage. Logistics upgrades are baked in. One more human moment. A mason tests fit by tapping two stones together. The sound sharpens when the contact area increases. At Puma Punku, that sound would have been a language. When the note rang right, the stone advanced. When it thunked, the rasp came out again. Precision is one thing. Here the mindset is the tell. Someone brought templates to the mountain. Someone enforced them, and the blocks still obey. Baalbek's Trilithon and the stone of the pregnant woman. If precision makes you question the workshop, Baalbek makes you question the yard. Here the problem isn't how clean the joint is. It's that the joint lives in a block heavier than a blue whale. This is where you can't lift that, stops being a taunt, and becomes a design constraint. Stakes first. If pre-industrial crews moved and placed blocks in the 751,000 ton range, then our timelines for logistics, traction, and risk management are off. Not by a little, by orders. Because once you can reposition 1,000 tons on command, every other site's massive looks small. Action on the ground. Walk the western retaining wall of the Temple of Jupiter and the Trilithon stares back. 3 limestone blocks, each roughly 19 meters long, 4 high, 3.5 thick, stacked with joints so controlled you could hide your hand in the seam and still feel stone-on-stone intimacy. Beneath them, Smaller foundation stones still hit 300–400 tons. Up the quarry road, the stone of the pregnant woman lies where it was cut but never pulled, dimensions that push the meter into 4 digits of tons. Nearby, another monolith, even larger, sleeps half-buried. These aren't showpieces. They're project leftovers and milestones. Now the sequence that matters. The quarry sits upslope, which means gravity is both enemy and tool. You can loosen a block with trenches, undercut it, crib it with timbers, then lever and slide it on a prepared bed. Slope helps start motion. Control keeps you from losing the sight. That suggests a choreography. Quarry crews cut with pre-planned sled clearance. Road teams grade a path. Wall crews set bedding courses wide enough to accept behemoths without edge crumble. Human angle. Picture the foreman at dawn staring down a block that could kill 30 men if a crib snaps. His calendar isn't philosophical, it's seasonal. Dry months give traction, wet months sink sleds. He's rationing rope because fiber weakens with knots and humidity. He's counting oxen or men or both, and he's talking to the carpenter about sled runners and sacrificial planks that will turn to pulp under load. Every meter costs wood. Every pause risks embedding the block in its own crushed bedding. Comparative loads clarify the gap. Egyptian obelisks hit 300–400 tons. Roman lifting culture handled multi-ton columns and architraves with treadwheel cranes and gangs. But 1,000 tons is outside crane logic. You don't lift it, you lower friction. That points to sled and rail systems. Lubricated clay, crushed stone beds, oiled surfaces, or wetting strategies to keep dust from turning to grit. Add in lever banks where long timbers and fulcrums walk a block sideways into final seating, a few centimeters at a time with chocks catching the backslide. The integration argument gets louder when you look at the layers. Roman temples ride the terrace, but the most massive courses under them may predate or represent a different construction episode. Styles differ, stone sizes jump scale. The overlay says reuse, respect, or both. Either way, the lower platform reads like an infrastructure decision. Make a base that won't move, then build forever. Pushback deserves oxygen. Some say the blocks were never truly moved far, that they were cut, slid a short distance, and jacked into place with earth ramps and patience. That's plausible, and it shrinks the feat from drag across miles to control for meters. It doesn't erase the problem, it restates it. Controlling 1,000 tons for meters without catastrophic failure still demands a playbook. What did that playbook include? Ropes plied into cables, possibly thick as a wrist, sleds with bronze-shod runners or carefully pebbled beds to avoid suction, rollers for smaller pieces but likely not under extreme weight where crushing turns timber into wedges, teams with poles to keep alignment, signal flags or horns so 100 pullers ease in unison. The physics isn't exotic, the system discipline is. Now the telltales. At quarries near Baalbek, you see draft lines, undercuts, and relief trenches that let a block sit on a ridge before release. That ridge acts like a hinge. Once a sled sits beneath, you chock, cut the hinge, and transfer weight to a platform already braced. If a corner chips, the bedding fails, so crews likely dress the receiving course in situ, checking high spots with straight edges and pigment, the way millwrights blue steel. Impact construction sequencing here implies an early decision. Oversize the foundation to move stress into the earth, not the wall. The Trilithon locks a retaining structure, it's not a vanity belt. That means the planners forecast lateral loads, soil pressure, quake impulse, and chose mass as insurance. They didn't need mathematics on paper to know that. They needed memory of collapse, which implies earlier failures we don't see. Meanwhile, the calendar bites. Move in the cool, avoid midday expansion. Keep fibers fresh, store coils out of sun. Replace sled shoes before a burnished runner becomes a skate and surges. The risk envelope is narrow. A single uncontrolled slide could shear a crew, splinter timber, and crater months of prep. The integration question returns. Roman overlay versus deeper megalith. If later builders chose to mount on that terrace, they were endorsing ancient engineering by action. You don't set Rome's grandest eastern temple on bad bones. You set it on the one thing in the valley that won't flinch. So could they move mountains? They did. Slowly, stubbornly, with physics anyone can test and logistics few can master. And if 1,000 tons can be persuaded to edge forward on command, then the sky might be next on the list of things they tamed. Nazca Lines and the sky problem. While Baalbek wrestles with gravity, Nazca argues with perspective. Out on the pampa, the world is flat, hot, and quiet. Then a line appears under your feet, chalk pale against rust soil, heading toward a horizon you can't see, dead straight over dips and swells that should bend it. Keep walking and the line doesn't wander. It keeps faith with a point you'll never reach on foot. Stakes first. If a culture without aerial vantage created earthworks readable at flight height, then they solved a problem of scale we usually outsource to towers, drones, or scaffolds. And if they did it reliably across hundreds of figures, then surveying discipline was infrastructure, not ornament. Action, the method is simple and unforgiving. The desert surface is an iron oxide crust. Scratch it off and the lighter ground shows. Drag a stone on a rope and the furrow brightens. For straight lines, plant 2 posts, run a cord, and clear along it. The surprise isn't that the technique works, it's how far the fidelity holds. Lines run kilometers, intersecting with other lines at fixed angles. Some form trapezoids and radiating fans. Others frame animal figures, colibri, spider, monkey, with curves so smooth they read like strokes, not shuffles. Walk a hill and the patterns start to cohere. The colibri's beak points along a track. The monkey's spiral tail curls with a consistent pitch. Try laying out that spiral with ad hoc steps and you drift. Use a turning radius and a chord pegged at a center and the geometry sings, which means someone pegged, pivoted, checked, and corrected before the sun set. Human angle. Picture crews spread thin across the pampa, a foreman with a knotted cord calling out step counts, a runner jogging between staked baselines with a tally on bark or cloth. At midday, heat shimmer bends sightlines, so they start early, finish late, and trust signals, flag waves, horn calls, mirrored flashes, to align teams beyond shouting distance. When a line crests a rise, a spotter stands on a ladder of lashed limbs to keep the string honest. Error gets caught at the next checkpoint, or the figure warps. Purpose draws debate. Ritual avenues toward water sources, processional routes to sites, astrology woven into earth. There's data for each. Some trapezoids aim at mountain passes where clouds snag and rain matters. Some animal figures sit near ancient wells. But the largest category, the long, thin lines and bands, act like survey legs, flattening the landscape into a board where angles can be tested and distances compared. The pampa becomes a chalkboard. Meanwhile, straight lines ride uneven ground without obvious course correction. That's the sky problem. To hold a line over bumps, you need intermediate targets, stakes on crests, markers in dips to relay direction. Set them wrong and you build a lazy S, set them right and the chord doesn't lie. The recurring success suggests a toolchain, citing frames, plumb lines, chord lengths guarded like currency. If a chord stretches, you toss it. If a stake shifts, you reset the entire run. That's cost, and someone was willing to pay it. Now the figures, curves without waviness imply template thinking. You can scale up a small drawing with a grid, lay a mesh of squares on the ground, copy cell to cell, keep proportions. The outlines at Nazca behave like that, controlled deviations, not improvisations. The monkey's hands repeat angles. The spider's legs mirror across a spine. Where errors creep in, they're systematic, the kind you get when a grid cell stretches near a slope. That's a fingerprint of method, not myth. Impact, visibility flips the script. Most designs are for the gods by default, they're for people. Here, ground truth fights you. You can't see the whole, but from nearby hills, from long sightlines, and yes, from altitude, the images snap into view. Even if nobody flew, they understood vantage. A planner could climb, signal, adjust. A priest could walk a line with a procession while a watcher on high declared the path true. The act of making the line may have been the ritual. Pushback matters. Critics argue that seen only from the air oversells it. They're right. Many figures are visible from the surrounding foothills. They also argue that straight lines over distance are easy with a chord and patience. Also true. The anomaly isn't a single line, it's the network. Hundreds of lines, fans, and shapes share baselines and angles, crowding without chaos. The system coherence hints at a master plan, seasons of work layered over years, returned to, corrected, extended. The hidden tell sits in consistency. Certain angles recur, 40-somethings, 50s, more often than chance would expect. You see families of orientations, like a compass rose stamped into desert. They don't map cleanly to every solstice or equinox, but bands cluster around significant sky events. Meanwhile, the lengths of some bands subdivide into regular segments, as if cut by a unit measure repeated across teams. Not numerology, pragmatism. If your chords match, your lines join without surprise. Human moment. A crew leader kneels at dawn, presses his ear to the ground, and hears the rasp of a dragged stone where it shouldn't be. He stands, waves his arm, and a boy sprints to stop the pull. 10 minutes later, the chord is realigned by a thumb's width at a distant stake. When the sun climbs, the figure will look inevitable. It is. It's curated. In the end, Nazca isn't about flight. It's about planning across terrain with tools that die in the weather. The lines survive because the method was stronger than the material. Lines in the desert are one thing, calendars carved in bronze are another. Antikythera Mechanism, analog sky computer. While lines in the desert stretch toward horizons, a corroded bronze box drags the horizon into your hands. Pulled from a shipwreck near Antikythera in 1901, it looked like scrap until it cracked open. Inside, gears, not a handful, dozens. Teeth so fine they catch light, plates inscribed in tiny Greek letters, and a logic that refuses to be mere ornament. This isn't a trinket, it's a mind condensed into metal. Stakes clean and blunt. If this device predicted eclipses, modeled lunar motion, tracked cycles of games and calendars, then the ceiling for ancient instrumentation jumps. You don't get here with a single savant. You need drafts, prototypes, and a bench culture that knows how to cut teeth repeatably. That means workshops we haven't found and apprentices who could feel a bad gear by sound alone. Action start at the back. Two spiral dials curl like nautilus shells. One follows a 223 lunar month Saros cycle, the rhythm behind eclipse prediction. Another tracks the 19-year metonic cycle, how the moon's phases sync with the solar year. Tiny glyphs beside scale marks don't just say eclipse. They note magnitude, direction of obscuration, even color, clues to dust and atmosphere. Up front, a train of gears couples solar and lunar displays, and the moon's motion isn't uniform. A pin and slot mechanism, an epicyclic trick, corrects for its anomaly so phases appear when they should. That's a mathematician whispering to a machinist. Human angle, picture the craftsman at a bench in Rhodes or Syracuse. Bronze sheets pinned to wood, scribes, letters scratched with a stylus, a saw singing through metal. He cuts a tooth, tests the mesh, listens. Too tight and it binds. Too loose and the phase drifts by hours in a year. He files, rinses in vinegar, checks again. An apprentice pumps the drill bow, pebbled abrasives biting into pivot holes. Their master knows which gear count maps to a Saros, which to a metonic, which to the Olympiad dial. This is a language in ratios. Knowledge network. The inscriptions nod at astronomical schools linked to Hipparchus, perhaps an echo of Rhodes' mines where star catalogs met shipping lanes. The shipwreck hints at trade routes. An instrument like this travels because sailors need sky. Port captains, festival planners, priests, anyone with calendars in their hands could have used one, but rarity cuts both ways. You don't risk a unique prototype at sea without confidence more exist. Most would have been bronze, easy to melt, easy to erase from archaeology. Application reality. Modern teams have rebuilt versions tooth for tooth from CT scans and microscopy. The reconstructions work. They advance dials, predict eclipse seasons, show the moon's phase with that lopsided grace. But even with machine tools, getting the tolerances to avoid cumulative error takes patience. The ancient device was likely housed in wood, with doors bearing inscriptions that acted like a user manual. You'd open it, set a date with a crank, and the heavens would roll across scales. It's tactile astronomy. Pushback deserves its turn. Some argue we're reading too much into fragments, that we're projecting modern expectations onto rust. But the inscriptions are explicit about cycles. The gear counts match known periods. The pointer labels name eclipses, games, months. Even the error, slight mismatches over decades, reads like an expected drift in a hand-cut system. It's not myth-making to respect what the letters say. Impact, immediate and quiet. To cut a train that long, you need standard gear modules, consistent tooth size and form. You need arbors that don't wobble, plates that don't warp. You need alloys that file clean and hold edges. That implies foundries tuned to recipe, metalworkers who can read color and quench at the right moment. This is logistics folded into a box, or sources, charcoal quality, brine for pickling, oil for burnishing pivots. A calendar you can hold is a supply chain in disguise. Meanwhile, consider the interface. The hand crank means a user engages, checks, resets, and believes. The inscription's likely guided operation, what month to set, what to expect on this or that cycle, where to look in the sky. That's pedagogy. The device teaches as it computes. The user becomes part of the mechanism, advancing time, watching pointers creep, learning patterns. Instruments like this democratize specialized knowledge without giving away the workshop secrets. Now the tie back to our three pillars. Precision. The tooth counts, center distances, and epicyclic slot demand tolerances that accumulate into accuracy. Logistics. Bronze, timber housing, fine drills, and abrasive slurries mean material mastery. Chronology. The conceptual package, Babylonian cycles expressed through Greek mechanics, points to layered traditions, not a lone breakthrough. You feel centuries speaking to each other. Human moment. Imagine a festival official in a coastal town checking an eclipse omen before a royal ceremony. He sets the crank, reads the glyph. The moon will darken in the second watch, magnitude marked by a letter, color a warning. He doesn't understand every ratio inside, but he trusts the hand behind the teeth. That trust rides a ship, sinks in a storm, and sleeps under salt 1,000 years until a sponge diver's hook snags it. So yes, calendars can be carved in the ground. But when you can put one on a shelf and turn the sky with your fingers, you've crossed a line. You've built an argument in bronze that the night can be domesticated, updated, rehearsed. And you don't do that once. You do it as a habit, and a habit leaves more fingerprints than we've bothered to look for. Göbekli Tepe and the civilizational reset. While bronze teeth turned in the Aegean, another kind of precision slept under Anatolian soil for millennia. When farmers near Şanlıurfa hit limestone with their shovels in the 199s, they weren't digging for history. They were digging around it. What surfaced wasn't a village, or a kiln, or a scatter of pots. It was a stone memory of gatherings on a scale nobody put before cities. Stakes straight and sharp. If monumental architecture shows up 7,000 years earlier than the city, the order of everything we tell ourselves is backwards. Action, walk the ridge and the wind carries, dust off circles cut into bedrock. Enclosures, carefully carved, their edges clean. In the center of each, 2 T-shaped pillars tall as a room with shoulders and belts and the hint of hands folded over empty bellies. Around them, a ring of smaller T-pillars faces inward, like a council frozen mid-ritual. Reliefs climb the stone, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, scorpions, etched with a confidence that feels practiced. The surfaces aren't rubble rough, they've been dressed. The pillars slot into carved pedestals with tongues and grooves. This isn't a pile, it's an assembly. Human angle, picture seasonal bands converging when the rains ease and grasses fatten gazelle. No pottery clinks, no draft animals grunt. People bring meat, skins, and stories. They bring muscle. The master carver arrives early and checks a quarry face already scored. Apprentices rub abrasive slurry over a pillar flank until the rasp shifts pitch from rough to satin. A planner walks a circle's footprint with a cord, pegs center, then marks where each monolith's foot will bite. There's hierarchy here, but it reads less like kings and more like roles. Hunters, carvers, the one who knows where to put the first stake. Complication, the site is pre-pottery. No wheel, no metal tools, yet the organization hums, enclosures layer on enclosures. Some pillars were reused, hauled from older circles and set in new ones as if the memory itself had to be preserved in the next version. Then comes the strangest choice, backfilling. They buried their own work with clean, deliberate fill, stone, earth, refuse, packed until the circles vanished. Not erosion, not collapse. Intentional entombment. Chronology break, and it matters. Agriculture shows up in nearby valleys, domesticated grains, early plots right around the same millennia. The standard story says surplus made monuments. Here, monument labor looks like it came first. People gathered to carve, raise pillars, feast, exchange knowledge, and only later did the settled fields lock in. Agriculture after monument reads like a reversal of causality we thought we owned. Meanwhile, the animal reliefs aren't random decoration. Repetition suggests themes, protection, danger, roles. Vultures stand over headless figures, foxes circle belts. Hands carved on the main T-pillars rest where a ribcage would be, implying personhood. But the T isn't a literal human. It's an abstraction, a marker of a class of beings. The carvers knew their icon set and deployed it with rules. The logistics whisper is loud. Quarry faces nearby show extraction scars. Pillars weren't dragged from far mountains, they were cut close, shaped, then moved. Ropes, levers, rollers, all possible. The receiving beds are carved to fit, which means test fits, corrections, then a final stand. That demands coordination across weeks and a shared unit of measure tight enough that a column doesn't wobble in its mortise. The unit itself, wooden rods, knotted cords, would rot. The behavior survives. Pushback has its place. Some argue the circles could be smaller than they look after collapse, that reconstruction's smooth irregularity, that precision is being read into rough stone. Walk the site. The joints where pedestal meets pillar tell the truth. Edges are chamfered to survive handling. The carved depth on reliefs is consistent across arcs. Even damage teaches. Breaks run along bedding planes, not bad alignments. Craft habits sit under the weather. Impact immediate and unsettling. Knowledge transfer is implied. You don't hit a pillar's silhouette, belt position, relief style, and circle plan across multiple enclosures without an internal model. A master could have taught apprentices on smaller stones, then graduated them to the big ones. Some enclosures are more refined than others, like school terms in stone. The rhythm suggests decades-long projects revisited seasonally, memory embodied by repetition. Now the burying, why entomb a site that size? You don't backfill casually when moving a single T takes days. 1. Read preservation. If a group's center of gravity is shifting, climate pressure, resource routes moving, they may have sealed their place the way we close a library, carefully protecting the contents for a future they won't meet. Another. Read ritual closure. Ending a cycle by putting it under the earth cements authority and memory at once. Both imply a decision across a wide coalition. That means governance without kings. Human moment. In the last season before a fill, a carver runs his fingers across a fox he etched 10 summers prior. He knows the fox will disappear in dark. He also knows the act of burying will hold the fox longer than the wind will. He nods, steps back, and calls for the next basket. Zoom out to our pillars: precision, logistics, chronology. Precision shows up in fits and repeated relief motifs. Logistics shows up in quarry sequence, transport choreography, labor planning, and the mass act of burial. Chronology flexes as the old sequence: farm, store, build, loses its monopoly. This is monument before city, curriculum before bureaucracy. And there's a tell that threads back through our other stops: template thinking. T-pillars replicate proportions. Circles obey radii and placement rules. An invisible speck lives here, enforced by people whose tools didn't survive. If the start moved back this far, what else moved with it? If the center was a gathering, what powered it might not have been grain alone. The Baghdad Battery and the power question. While Göbekli Tepe resets the start line, a clay jar in a basement museum pokes the power question we keep dodging. It's small, it's ordinary, and it might not be what its nickname promises. But if a humble pot can move electrons on command, every metal surface in antiquity deserves a second look. Stakes on the table. Controlled current changes interpretation. If workshops had a way to produce even a whisper of voltage, then finishes, plating, and chemical treatments shift from mystery patina to deliberate surface engineering. If they didn't, the jar is just a clever container bound to ritual or storage. Either way, the test is merciless and simple. Does it produce a measurable, repeatable potential under conditions the ancient maker could have set? Action. The artifact stack usually cited includes a ceramic jar, a copper sheet rolled into a cylinder, and an iron rod or nail isolated from the cylinder by bitumen. Pour in an acidic solution, vinegar, lemon juice, or wine soured with time, and the chemistry wakes. Iron wants to give electrons, copper wants to take them. Connect the two metals externally and you'll see a small voltage, often under a volt, and a skittering of current that fades as the iron corrodes and the electrolyte fouls. Modern replicas do this easily. The question is purpose, not possibility. Human angle. Picture an artisan in a Parthian or Sasanian workshop. He's plating bright finishes on bronze amulets by burnishing with mercury gilding techniques centuries later codified, or he is. He's storing sacred scrolls in a jar that must be sealed from damp, or he is. He's a practical operator, not a textbook author. If he needs a reaction, he'll find a way to get it. Copper and iron were everywhere. Bitumen sealed boats, jars, roofs. Acids lurked in kitchens and presses. The parts exist in the world. What ties them together is intent. Impact if real. Electroplating on a small scale becomes plausible. A thin flash of copper onto a base metal, a highlight on an icon, a repair pass on a worn contact. Tingles and shocks become ritual theater, an oracle bowl that buzzes a fingertip, a priest's trick that turns faith into sensation. Medical stings, cauterization's cousin, could claim virtue. None of this requires batteries in series. It requires a handful of cells, refreshed and swapped like oil lamps. Evidence gap bites hard. We don't have racks of jars wired together with bronze leads. We don't have carbonized remnants of switches, no inscriptions explaining polarity. Distribution is thin and the context of many finds is messy: old digs, poor records, parts separated from mates. That matters. A single jar with a copper liner could be a storage vessel. The iron could be a stopper. The bitumen could be pure sealant. Ritual containers often mix materials because they were at hand, not because they were designed for current. Theories versus tests. Run plating trials with replicas and you can deposit a film, uneven, delicate, a hint of color that convinces the hopeful. Run them again with better preparation and you get more. But scale kills you. To plate a statue, you'd need arrays of jars, stable electrolytes, careful cleaning, and time. What the jars excel at is teaching. They prove a cell can be assembled from period ingredients and that it behaves like a cell. They don't prove anyone used them that way. Human logistics if they did. Workshop rhythms adjust. Electrolyte jars sit near the doorway, away from dust. Copper cylinders get swapped when salts creep. Iron rods pit and get replaced on a schedule the apprentice keeps on a tally stick. Wires, or more likely, strips and clamps, run between pots and a small bath. The master watches the sheen grow, nods, and pulls the piece to rinse in a basin. The smell of vinegar hangs over bronze and leather. Pushback needs air. Ritualists say the jars are apotropaic, containers for sacred scrolls or oils sealed against time. Conservators point to bitumen residue patterns that look like closures, not bushings. Historians note the silence in texts. The same cultures who wrote lists of tools didn't record battery trees. Skeptics add, electricity leaves scars, soot tracks, wire grooves, lead drip, none of which are obvious at scale in secure contexts. Those hits land. What it would explain and what it wouldn't. It could explain localized plating, particular patinas, or showmanship that needed a hidden spark. It would not explain lost kilowatts, power grids, or lamps that outshine oil. It could cohabit with temples and scrolls. It would not replace them. It could be a workshop trick. It would not be the engine of civilization. Meanwhile, remember our pattern: habits, not miracles. The Baghdad battery, if it's a battery, fits a habit of practical chemistry we already see in dye houses, tanneries, and metal shops. If it's a jar, the lesson stands anyway. The boundary between ritual vessel and working apparatus is thinner than we like to admit. A maker's eye doesn't care which shelf a thing sits on. It cares what the thing can be made to do. 7 sites, 3 pillars, precision, logistics, chronology, power, maybe, whispers from clay. And if voltage isn't the missing energy, organization is. Pattern 1. The measurement echo, shared ratios and units. While the sites look nothing alike, they hum with the same quiet rhythm, lengths that recur, angles that repeat, proportions that feel predecided. This is the measurement echo, the hint that surveyors carried more than chords. They carried standards. Stakes first. If a hidden unit is traveling across deserts, highlands, coastlines, then builders aren't guessing. They're referencing, and reference breeds replication. It also leaves fingerprints we can test without mysticism, ratios, error bands, and convergences that survive measurement noise. Start with baselines. When crews choose a unit, it shows up in module steps, course heights, block widths, stair risers, gallery offsets. At Giza, the ground plan reads like a discipline. Sides within inches across hundreds of feet, right angles held with stubborn intent. Whether or not a golden ratio was encoded is less interesting than the repeat of consistent offsets, the way galleries step the same amount course after course. That's the behavior of a ruler you trust. Shift to Puma Punku. The H-blocks repeat interior recesses with widths and depths that match across pieces. You can argue about symbolic meaning forever. You can't argue with interlocks that seat because the mortise and tenon equivalents hit the same figures. That implies templates, wood or string, cut to a unit that apprentices check against morning and midday to catch stretch. When different teams make parts that still mate, a shared length lies between them. Baalbek answers with mass, but the echo sits in the bedding. The receiving courses under the trilithon are dressed to tolerances that require a measuring habit, straight edges, pigment rubs, and a known expectation of flat over span. Across that terrace, joint heights line up. Even where stone size leaps, bed joints aim for a regular course thickness, a module you can sight across at sunrise and not see the line wander. Nazca pushes the conversation into angle space. Yes, lines run straight. More telling, families of orientations recur, like someone stamped a master compass rose into the pampa and used it season after season. When trapezoids share baselines and cut matching flares, you're watching ratios at work, fixed spreads, constant divergences. A unit length matters less than the fidelity of angle, but the discipline is the same. Repeat what the cord and peg say, not what the hill suggests. Antikythera brings ratios into metal and makes the case explicit. Gear counts embody periods. 223 lunar months for Saros, 19 years for Meton, translated into tooth trains. That's units all the way down, teeth per turn, turns per display, display per cycle. The ruler is bronze, its divisions are gear profiles, and its echo is the way errors accumulate predictably. If you can count and cut consistently, you can predict the sky's return. At Göbekli Tepe, the unit whispers through pillar proportions. T-shapes keep shoulder widths and shaft heights in stable relationships. Enclosures hold radii that repeat within an enclosure family. The footings, sockets aren't random depths. They match enough to tell you a rule existed. You don't get that with pure intuition. You get it with layout chords and a tally of spans that a master enforces. Now the filter, what's numerology and what is? If a ratio survives across methods, materials, and crews, and if it shows up where fit matters, joints, sockets, angles that guide large-scale layout, it counts. If a number emerges only after cherry-picking decimals and switching units mid-sentence, it's romance. We stick to places where a wrong length breaks a build or a wrong angle ruins sighting. Human angle always. Imagine the keeper of measures, the quiet backbone of any project. He carries a rod cut from stable wood, seasoned, checked against a reference every new moon. He guards strings that haven't stretched, replaces them when they have, marks them with knots at known intervals. He trains hands to feel when a straight edge rocks, to hear when two surfaces begin to sing in contact. He's not a priest, he's quality control. His signature isn't a mark, it's the absence of drift. Impact spreads. A shared unit lets distant teams contribute parts that fit. It lets guilds migrate, bringing pattern, books, and habits. It lets time survive memory loss. If the rod is right, the wall will stand. Navigation leans on it, calendar stones lean on it, workshops lean on it. The echo isn't magic, it's the survival of a rule. Payoff, conservative and tight. We don't need a single global qubit to hear the pattern. We need proof that in multiple places at critical interfaces, builders privileged repeatable lengths and angles over ad hoc fit, and did so with a system that constrained error. That's what the stones show. Not perfection, preference. Measurements travel with maps. If an echo of lengths and angles keeps showing up, someone drew more than walls. They drew instruction. Pattern 2, the sky code, astronomy baked into stone. While the measurement echo rides along ground and gear, another pattern looks up. The sky isn't a backdrop here, it's a metronome. Across sites, stones and sightlines keep folding night into architecture, not as decoration but as schedule and authority. Stakes tight and human. If different builders tuned their monuments to the same celestial beats, solstices, lunar standstills, eclipse seasons, then they were syncing harvests, rituals, tax cycles, and power to a clock nobody could forge. Miss the sky and your feast fails. Hit it and your world runs on time. Action site to site. At Giza, the pyramid faces cling to cardinal axes. That's not northish. It's deliberate alignment, the kind you get by tracking circumpolar stars and pinning a baseline when they cross a plumb line at night. The consequence is practical. Sunrise and sunset rake those edges on predictable days, marking seasonal change without a priest's speech. Shift to Puma Punku's world. The Tiwanaku complex, in view of high Andean horizons, wraps architecture around solar stations. Window and wall alignments frame solstice sunrise and sunset over distant peaks. The message is simple. The sun's swing is contained, named, owned. When the dry season starts, the shadow tells you before the clouds do. Builders design sightlines that ignore local clutter and grab distant markers, because mountains don't move and priests can't argue with silhouettes. Nazca's line families cluster into orientation bands that crowd solstitial and equinoctial angles. Not every line is astronomical, but the density around key azimuths suggests more than chance. Trapezoids flare towards sectors where the sun rises in summer or sets in winter. Fans radiate like crude protractors, letting crews test whether a day was drifting early or late. The pampa acts like a low-tech observatory spread flat. You walk a baseline, stand at a marker, and watch the star or sun split the notch you prepared seasons ago. Antikythera makes the sky code explicit. Saros and Meton cycles aren't myths, they're period math carved into bronze. That device didn't just display time, it predicted when alignments would produce omens. Eclipse months weren't surprises, they were scheduled. That knowledge bleeds backward into stones. You don't value an eclipse dial if eclipses don't already matter culturally and ritually. At Göbekli Tepe, the case is quieter and demands restraint. Night congregations under carved vultures and foxes didn't need telescopes to read the year. A circle's axis could single out a sunrise notch. A pillar's face could catch a first ray at a turning point. Whether specific constellations were coded is a maze of claims. What's safe is the behavior. Enclosures provide controlled horizons, and repeated orientations imply a memory of sky events embedded in plan. What nobody knew at the time, until excavation and modeling made it obvious, is how much precision simple tools can buy when the sky does the heavy lifting. A plumb bob, a cord, and patience can beat a wandering needle. Fix 2 days of the year, the solstices, and you can lay out a calendar that farmers trust and rulers exploit. When the sun touches the same corner of a lintel every winter's edge, your announcement day isn't negotiable. Now the filter. Alignments are noisy. Mountains tempt cherry-picking. We need clusters that beat chance and functions that matter. Solstice corridors used for processions. Windows that frame a standstill moon's extreme rise twice a decade. Courtyards that flood with light at a single dawn and stay dim the rest of the year. Where those coincidences line up with agricultural or ritual pivots, the alignment counts. where a single stone happens to point somewhere once it doesn't. Human angle always. The skykeeper in a community isn't a robe floating above labor. He's a scheduler. He posts the day for sowing. He nails the night for a debt's end. He trains an apprentice to watch for the star that returns just before dawn in spring. They maintain the instruments, a straight stick, a marked cord, a notch cut in a wall. The tools rot. The calendar doesn't because the monuments rehearse it daily with light and shadow. Impact ripples outward. Night sky logic standardizes narratives. Myths become mnemonics for processions crawl, for the beat of eclipse seasons, for the patience needed to catch a rare standstill. Royal power rides those beats. Ceremonies pinned to predictable heavens look sanctioned. Trade uses them too. Caravans leave when stars clear a certain wall. Payoff conservative and strong. Not every stone aims at a star. Enough do in ways that serve clocks and crowds to say the sky was baked in as infrastructure. When measurements travel with maps and the heavens fix the map to time, logistics gets teeth. Everything was about to change when builders realized light itself could be a ruler, and they set their lives to it. Pattern 3. Logistics, templates, and hidden workshops. While the sky set the calendar, hands still had to meet stone and metal on schedule. Big builds don't happen because people tried hard. They happen because supply chains, templates, and training pipelines run in the background like an operating system. That system doesn't fossilize well, so we read it in negative space, marks, fits, and repeats that only make sense if a hidden workshop culture existed. Stakes are simple. Without logistics, precision collapses into lucky moments. With logistics, precision becomes policy. The proof sits where labor meets limits, quarry faces, tool signatures, and modular pieces that behave like siblings separated at birth. Start at the quarries. Extraction scars at places like Aswan or the limestone banks near Giza show cut lines, ridge hinges, and relief trenches, evidence that blocks were planned with release sequences, not hacked free. That's a template move. Define planes, isolate, transfer weight, then slide onto a prepared bed. At Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, dovetail slots for bronze cramps repeat forms, implying a pattern library for fast, consistent stitching. The stone isn't guessing, it's answering a prompt. Tool signatures matter. Copper saw striations paired with grit point to wet saw routines. Cord cut grooves with uniform kerf widths say the cord and abrasive were controlled. Same slurry, same tension, same pull rhythm across teams. Where surfaces mate, pigment rubs, bluing with ochre or charcoal, likely revealed high spots, a machinist's trick in prehistory. You don't invent that on last day. Someone teaches it on scrap first. Templates are the quiet tyrants. Wooden squares, string frames, and reference rods die in soil, but their echoes don't. Repeated offsets in the grand gallery steps, matching mortise depths in Andean H-blocks, right angles that don't drift across long runs. These are the footprints of jigs. A master template maker, likely anonymous, stands at the center of this world. He calibrates rods against a master stick kept dry, retires cords that stretch, and marks angle frames with scribe cuts no apprentice misreads. His failures would ripple as misfits. His success looks like inevitability. Modularity scales labor. When interlocks and course heights match across crews, parts fabricated in parallel converge without drama. That demands pattern books, mental or literal. Cut this notch to 2 thumbs deep, 3 to the step. Drill recesses a palm apart. The units vary by culture, the discipline doesn't. It's how you turn hundreds of hands into one decision. Logistics then wraps the templates in time. Quarries need timber for sleds and levers. Timber needs foresters and seasons. Stone moves on roads that have to be graded, watered, and defended from ruts. Rope rots. Coils must be dried, inspected, and spliced by spinners who understand twist and load. Food moves to the crews, waste moves away. When a 1,000-ton block waits on a slope, logistics isn't glamorous, it's survival. Test cases expose the invisible. Modern replication attempts succeed only when they import the same hidden layers. Standardized gauges, staging yards with level reference pads, and a culture of reject and remake when a part drifts. Where they shortcut, mixing units, tolerating slop, the assembly punishes them. The originals, for all their weathered edges, still fit where fit mattered. That's not romance, it's systems engineering. So where are the workshops? Likely in the shadows archaeologists know well. Ephemeral sheds near quarries, timber scaffolds burned or salvaged, workyards swept clean at project's end. Pattern books could have been on bark, leather, or papyrus. Chisel handles carved with gauge marks, cords knotted at intervals, wooden angles pinned true. None of it wants to survive. What does are secondary traces? Standardized clamp sockets, repetitive relief depths, gear teeth that share a module. The absence of the tool doesn't erase the habit. Traveling guilds tie the map. Skills move with people. A template maker can ride a caravan and bootstrap a local crew to his standard in a season. Quarry marks, symbols, tallies, little signatures hint at teams leaving their tags, the way stonemasons later carved marks into cathedral blocks for pay and pride. When styles jump borders but methods stay tight, you're watching guild DNA replicate. Impact is bigger than stone. Logistics disciplines infect everything. Inventory math, calendar lock procurement, apprenticeship ladders that filter out shaky hands before they touch critical joints. It explains why precision clusters where failure would cascade, corners, beds, interlocks, and relaxes where mass forgives. It explains how a ship could carry a bronze computer built in a shop we'll never excavate because the real artifact isn't a bench, it's a process. Payoff, grounded and uncomfortable. The missing workshops might not be missing. We might be walking through them, calling them quarry spoil, tooling marks, reused platforms, and overlooking the curriculum written in repeatable acts. We aren't waiting on a cache of golden tools. We're waiting on a shift in what we count as evidence, habits over relics, templates over treasures. If that's right, the map isn't dotted with miracles. It's threaded with manuals, unbound, unwritten, and still legible in stone. The gatekeepers, why the official timeline stuck. While the stones whisper habits, the timeline shouts tradition. It didn't stick because evidence was perfect. It stuck because incentives were. Inside universities and ministries, people don't just manage facts, they manage risk. Start with the trench. Field archaeologists live by permits. A dig license depends on a research plan that won't embarrass the agency issuing it. Propose lost workshops that rewrote history, and the reviewer sees tabloids, not trenches. Safer to frame your question inside familiar periods and methods. Ceramics typology, stratigraphy, incremental site reports. You keep your permit, you keep your career. Funding runs in lanes. Grants reward clear deliverables. Catalog this pottery, conserve that wall, publish 3 papers with cautious language. A bold synthesis across continents and millennia. That's a book advance, not a grant. The money that buys trowels and lab time flows to projects that promise certainty, not questions that might split a department in half. Then there's peer review, the world's best break and worst anchor. A paper that claims unprecedented precision must pass readers trained to mistrust adjectives. They will ask for context, error bars, confounds. They'll cut rhetorical reach, sand the edges, and demand you erase any word that could be read as a claim beyond your trench. That's healthy, until anomalies get shaved off so smoothly they vanish. Human angle, not villains. The PhD who declines your wild-sounding paper is protecting the field from grifts that burn students and donors. The site director who says no to your camera crew remembers colleagues whose digs were shut after a TV segment turned nuance into cartoons. A curator who refuses to display a speculative battery isn't hiding truth. They're avoiding lawsuits and headlines when the interpretation shifts. Meanwhile, textbooks lag. They move on adoption cycles tied to school boards and budgets. Even when a field's consensus tilts, classroom pages can take a decade to catch up. Teachers cling to coherent stories that fit a semester. Monuments before cities, logistics guilds without writing, analog computers in shops we can't find is hard to test on a Tuesday. So the old ladder, stone, bronze, iron, alphabet, city, holds even when the rungs blur. Add the trench politics. Digs depend on local partners. A narrative that fits national pride greases skids, one that credits outsiders or an unknown prehistory can sour a collaboration. Teams learn the art of the acceptable story. The scaffolding goes up, focus on the temple, footnote the anomalous foundations. Publish the safe layer, promise the rest later. Later doesn't come. Journalism doesn't help much. Headlines reward certainty and villains. Academia hides truth cells. It also triggers a reflex. Close ranks, deny interviews, wait the cycle out. The researchers you need to test the hypothesis retreat to jargon and grant reports. The wedge widens. The anomaly sits in a caption nobody reads. Historical whiplash shows this isn't new. Germ theory took a century to chase out miasma. Continental drift was a career killer until seafloor mapping locked the plates in place. Even in archaeology, Clovis first reigned until sites forced a retreat. Paradigms don't fall to arguments, they fall to methods that corner them in public. So what would change the textbook? Standards of proof that speak the gatekeeper's language. Secure context, chain stratigraphy, unbroken provenance. Methods that can be replicated by skeptics with the same result. Numbers with error bars that shrink when different teams measure. Inscriptions or toolkits found in situ, not in markets. And above all, predictions that pay off. Because the timeline isn't guarded by belief alone, it's guarded by workflows. If a claim can't slot into radiocarbon labs, petrography protocols, or LiDAR grids, it dies on the lab bench. The path forward isn't outrage, it's better specs. Pre-register a survey. Publish sampling plans. Open your data before conclusions calcify. Invite the critic early, put their name on the method, and hand them the shovel. Constructive path, step by step. Train a generation fluent in both camps, storytellers who can run a total station, lab techs who can explain a p-value without killing the room. Fund slow work, cataloging tool marks across regions, building open repositories of gear modules, archiving clamp sockets with photogrammetry dense enough to test templates at scale. Reward null results that close doors cleanly. Most of all, change what counts as evidence. If we value habits, template repeats, tolerance clustering, synchronized orientation bands, then we need journals and museums that treat those aggregates as artifacts in themselves. Not a stone, a data set of stones, not one mechanism, a map of gear modules. Gatekeepers aren't the enemy. They're the quality floor, but floors can calcify into ceilings. To raise the room, risk has to be shared. Put the hypothesis at stake in public. Make failure cheap and honest. Let the timeline move where the measurements, the logistics, and the sky push it. The test, a single prediction that can break the stalemate. We've argued habits over miracles. Now we risk it. One prediction stated in clear, testable terms with outcomes that cut either way in public. No wiggle room, no interpretation will vary. We call our shot, then show up with the tools. Here's the claim. If templates and logistics guilds underwrote megalithic precision, then the places where that precision peaks should hide their infrastructure within a predictable radius and terrain profile. Specifically at Puma Punku, Tiwanaku, and at Baalbek, we predict buried workshop zones, leveled pads with dense toolmark debris, discarded stone templates, clamp casting pits, and high-phosphate organic horizons, located downslope from primary builds, within 200 meters, adjacent to water access and wind shelter. Why that pattern? Workshops want three things: drainage, supply flow, and quiet air. They sit close enough to feed stones and clamps without hauling waste through sacred space, far enough to keep grit and smoke off the monument, and low enough to catch runoff without flooding. If templates existed, they were maintained where damage was reversible and eyes were fewer. Method plain: pre-register coordinates and search polygons before anyone steps on site. Publish them, then run a tiered survey. LiDAR to pull microtopography, terrace cuts, borrow pits, berms too regular to be natural. Multispectral drone imaging to flag vegetation anomalies. Nitrogen-rich stripes where organics rotted, ash lenses, salt blooms from evaporated quench pits. Ground-penetrating radar in grids to catch foundation pads, compacted work floors, trench arrays for clamp casting and coolant channels. Magnetometry for kiln or forge signatures, burned soils, slag halos. Parallel lab work. Geochemical sourcing on stone flakes. Match them to monument lithologies to prove on-site dressing, not random quarry debris. Residue analysis in clamp-shaped negatives. Copper, arsenic, nickel traces against background soil. Microwear on discarded stone or ceramic straight edges, if found. Polish bands consistent with frequent rubbing. What nobody knew at the time, and we have to prove now, is whether waste patterns can fingerprint a template culture. That's our second prediction. If a template system existed, toolmark dimensions will cluster. Repeated saw kerf widths, consistent drill bit diameters, uniform dovetail socket geometry, all tighter than random handwork across a broad sample. We predefine those bins, publish the thresholds, and let anyone run the same code on the dataset. Outcome trees, no hedging. Positive workshop signature at one site, null at the other. Supports localized logistics, weakens global guild claims. Our measurement echo shrinks to a regional habit. We eat that result. Positive at both sites with overlapping clamp socket modules or kerf distributions. The guild hypothesis gets teeth. We still need a migration path, but habit travels steps out of metaphor. Null at both with clean, transparent negatives. The template guild claim retracts. Precision becomes a site-level emergence, not a shared operating system. We say it on camera. We extend the test to a control, a megalithic-looking site without documented high-precision interlocks. Same radius, same tools, same thresholds. If our workshop signals pop at the precision sites and not at control, we've got contrast. If they pop everywhere, we've got a confound and a better question. Collaboration is the shield. We invite critics first, local archaeologists, permit holders, lab directors. They co-design sampling grids, veto intrusive trenches, and hold the keys to the raw data. We stream the field, daily dumps of geophysics, preprint protocols, versioned code for toolmark clustering. No embargoes. If we cherry-pick, the audience will see the pits we ignored. Cost and time are real. LiDAR and drone passes in dry season. GPR and MAG in early morning when thermal gradients calm. Lab queues booked months out, so we break the task into phases with public gates. If phase 1 imaging shows nothing but dunes, we stop. If it lights up regular pads and trenches where there should be none, we earn the right to ground truth with small cores, then targeted test pits, again streamed. One more piece to lock bias out, blind review of masks. We hand anonymized toolmark photos to multiple teams. They measure kerfs and sockets without site labels. If distributions converge only when the labels return, we've fooled ourselves. If they converge blind, the habit is real. This is how we move the room, not by telling a better story, but by writing a better spec. We set a trap for our own thesis and step into it with everyone watching. If the workshops are there, they'll show their edges. If they aren't, we'll say so and follow the data to a different answer. Either way, the stalemate ends where the ground tells us no or yes. Final reveal, the missing link you noticed but didn't name. We've circled precision, sky, logistics. But the quiet detail repeating across all 7 isn't a number or a star. It's the habit of interfaces, surfaces and systems designed to meet, separate, and meet again without damage. You felt it at every stop, you just didn't call it out. At Giza, that habit shows up where casing met core, joint faces dressed until they sang, gaps controlled so weather enters but doesn't pry. Inside, relieving blocks don't fight the chamber, they couple and decouple loads as the structure breathes. Interfaces tuned. At Puma Punku, the language is literal. Interlocks and cramps that seat clean, release clean, and allow replacement without remaking the whole wall. The H-block isn't a brag. It's a policy. Parts must cooperate without glue. That's an interface rulebook, not ornament. At Baalbek, the interface is mass on mass. Bedding courses flatten so 1,000 tons shares stress across an area wide enough that microcrush smooths, not shatters. The Trilithon isn't just heavy. It's a negotiation between block and earth that anticipates settlement and keeps it benign. The quarry hinge method? Another interface, stone to sled, engineered to switch support without shock. Nazca's lines seem like the opposite of joints, but the repeat is there. Lines connect vantage to ground, hills to plains, season to step. Each stake-to-stake handoff is an interface decision, where site becomes chord, where chord becomes scrape. The result is a network that can be expanded, corrected, and stitched without tearing what came before. Antikythera makes the principle explicit. Gear trains are nothing but interfaces, tooth to tooth, arbor to plate, pin in slot. It only works because every meeting tolerates motion without drift. The inscriptions serve the same role, operator to mechanism, an interface that turns users into reliable parts of the cycle. Göbekli Tepe anchors the idea in ritual stone. Pillar to socket, circle to axis, hand relief to torso plane. Each contact is planned for assembly, use, and eventual burial. Even the backfilling reads like a designed parting. Interface the monument with soil in a way that preserves forms, not crushes them. And the Baghdad jar, whether battery or vessel, is pure interface logic. Copper to electrolyte, iron to sealant, metal to mouth. If it functioned electrically, it was an engineered meeting. If it kept a text dry, it was the same instinct applied to storage. In both cases, the thing that matters is how parts touch. That's the signature, habits of design contact that survive when tools rot and stories split. It's not aliens. It's not magic ratios whispering across oceans. It's the boring genius of making edges honest so systems can grow, swap, and heal. Shared units help, sky clocks help, logistics feeds it. But the fingerprint is the consistent respect for interfaces across material, scale, and purpose. Meaning lands hard and simple. Advanced wasn't lasers, it was organization aimed at meeting points. A civilization that prizes interfaces can push complexity without collapse. You don't need a lost power grid to see that culture. You just need to read where things touch and refuse to look away. That decision to perfect the meeting points, Stone on stone, tooth on tooth, line to horizon, rewrites the timeline more than any myth ever could. If you want to see this hypothesis risked in the open data field test, subscribe and watch the next film. Share this with the friend who trusts the textbook, then hold us to the spec. We'll let the ground answer.